Hello, everyone. My name is Stephanie Boozer. I'm with CUGC HQ, and I am so excited to welcome you to today's CUGC Women in Tech webinar. We are going to be having a great conversation today with Nikki Lewis Simon. She's the shareholder and Chief Diversity Officer at Greenberg Traurig Law Firm. Before we dive in today, I just want to thank our 2020 Women in Tech sponsors. We are proudly supported by Citrix, Cohesity, Control Up, EG Innovations, iGel Technology, and Nutanix. And without their support, we couldn't do a lot of the things that we do. Usually that involves us getting together at Citrix Synergy, which unfortunately isn't happening this year. But there are other things that we can do, and we're just so grateful for their support. If you would like to know anything more about CUGC's Women in Tech program, I'm going to drop my email in the chat in just a little bit, and please feel free to reach out to me. The mentoring program that they provide is a one-to-one mentoring partnership, so you get partnered up with a mentor, and it's for roughly a 6-month period of time. And you also have access to our, as you can see in this photograph, we have 3 male mentors at large that lend their awesome expertise and are great supporters of the program. So if you'd like to know more, I'll put my email in the chat in just a little bit, and definitely reach out. All right, a couple of housekeeping tips before we get started. Just want to let you know that today's presentation is being recorded. You will receive a link to the recording tomorrow. That email is going to come directly from GoToWebinar, so just be on the lookout for that. Also, feel free to submit your questions at any time during today's discussion. We can take those after the presentation, but I do want you to enter those in as you have them, just so you don't forget. So put those in anytime. And finally, I have a short survey for you at the end. It's completely anonymous and it's very quick. We just like to get your feedback on all of our webinars. All right, so in just a bit, I'm going to hand things directly over to Sarah and Nikki, but first I want to tell you who they are. So Sarah Vogt is our CUGC Steering Committee Vice President. She's also an Orlando CUGC leader, and she's one of the mentors in our Women in Tech program. She is a remote systems engineer at Greenberg Traurig, and that is how she has this relationship with Nikki Lewis Simon, and we're so grateful for that. I think Nikki has helped her along the way in some of her endeavors, so we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Nikki is obviously the shareholder and chief diversity officer at Greenberg Traurig. She is responsible for a lot of great initiatives there. The company is, I think you guys have 41 offices and all over the place. So that's
Yep.
So Sarah has a big job and Nikki has a big job. Yeah. And we're going to get into all of that. So here we go. I'm going to turn things over to you guys. I am going to stop sharing my slides now. And I'm going to turn off my webcam and I'm going to come back at the end for the Q&A portion just to help you guys get through the questions. And then, we'll just let you guys have at it.
Awesome.
Are we starting with the polls or do I start now?
Oh, right. Thank you, Sarah. We want to know who's out there. I almost forgot. Thanks so much. So first of all, we're trying to get a sense of where you guys are. So I have one poll. Here you go. We figured if we asked you what the weather's like in your neck of the woods, we might figure out where you are. So some of you might have just gotten snow. I know the Northeast have just gotten surprised by a very late spring snow. And some people are already blisteringly hot. So, and then if you're in Europe or elsewhere, who knows what's going on. It looks like it's about, some people are hot and some people have spring, and a very small percentage have snow here. I'll show you. There you go. Good. Look at that.
Yeah.
And then also we were curious to know how many of you are working remote, like suddenly working remote, or how many of you are actually still having to go into the office, or how many of you have always been working remotely, but now you suddenly have some annoying, maybe not annoying, but some new coworkers like dogs and cats and kids and all of that.
Spouses.
Spouses.
Mhm.
So looks like, here we go.
Wow, nobody looks like they're going in.
Yeah,
Wow.
shocking. That's
Wow.
great.
That's
Everybody's staying safe.
fantastic.
Wow.
Awesome.
Wow. All
Okay,
right.
good to
Very
know.
interesting. Hmm.
All right, guys. All right, all up to you now.
Thanks,
Take it
Stephanie.
away. Uh-huh.
Thank you. Okay, so I will take the baton from here for a few minutes. I just will briefly would like to say good morning and to sound like every email that you've gotten from your credit cards to, your movie providers to your local schools. We hope you are well.
Yes.
We know that these have not been easy times. So we are glad you're here and please stay safe. And with that, to introduce myself, as Stephanie said, I am Sarah Vogt. I worked with Greenberg Traurig. I'm also a third year Women in Mentor. As she said, I'm the Orlando CUGC leader and the steering committee since 2017 and recently became the vice president. And while that all sounds really glamorous and kind of fancy, at most, I am you guys. I 23 years in Greenberg Traurig and 25 years in the trenches, pushing carts, wielding screwdrivers, and freezing in data centers. The last 2 months
Mm.
have been some of the most challenging and some of the most
Mm.
rewarding. And based on that poll, it looks like other people have done so as well because we are all afforded that opportunity to work from home. I have sat in server rooms, data centers, sat at conference tables with predominantly men, if not exclusively, that I'm the only female there. The one perk always being that the bathrooms are free and clear. We've been to Citrix Synergy. We all know that men are complaining about the bathrooms, and ours are free and clear and clean. So we do have our perks. But being a woman in technology has its challenges. And we're here to discuss that and get some advice and motivation and inspiration from Nikki. Some of the jobs that I've had, or some of the things that I have dealt with, are being called a distraction, sitting at conference tables, being interviewed by a vendor to basically have to prove myself, answering questions that come in, they get directed to the mail. I answer the question, the new question comes back to the mail, and so it turns like that. I've been harassed. I have gratefully, in the core of my career, have always worked with men who are very aware and very patient and knew the situations that I have dealt with over the years. And most of all, they trusted me. My first encounter with Nikki was being asked to work on the Citrix 2019 diversity panel at Citrix Energy. I knew if I'm going to speak on Greenberg's behalf that I would need approval, and they directed me to Nikki, who also wanted to make sure that I knew I was speaking correctly for Greenberg Traurig, to make sure that I understood where we began in the 1960s with 2 Jewish men in Miami. And I knew Greenberg was always very progressive, but I honestly did not appreciate the level. I was more amazed after that being a part of that and prouder than ever to be with Greenberg Traurig. Flash forward to the 2019-2020 Women in Mentor class. I am proud to mentor Stephanie Cox. She's from Indiana, so I chose, there was a lot of like, okay, she's a Hoosier, I'm a Hoosier. There was a lot of reasons that I was like, this could really be great. They had just won the Citrix Synergy Innovation Award. And so I started Googling her before I contacted her, and I saw the video of the Innovation Award, and I thought, goodness, this girl should be mentoring me and not the other way around. When I got to know her, she had goals and challenges that I don't face. She had aspirations for her job that I don't necessarily share. So the one thing I have learned in my career is if you don't know the answer to something, you find out who to ask. So I went to Nikki. I called on her and was able to arrange a phone call between Stephanie and Nikki. And as I was relaying that account to my other women in tech mentors, we created this webinar. So with that, I will hand it over to the ever empowering Nikki Lewis Simon that I am very grateful. I mean, every time I walk away from you, I feel better about myself. So I'm hoping I can
Oh
share that
boy,
now with you all.
thanks. So
No,
hopefully, can
go
you
ahead.
hear me, Sarah? You can hear
Yes,
me?
yes.
Great. So good morning, everyone. Thank you, Sarah and whew, Stephanie, for having me. I just wanted to first say, this is an amazing opportunity to share. And what I'll start with and really want to preface all of my comments with is that certainly since at least middle school, through law school and even to today, everything that I'm going to share is really a part of a faith walk in terms of, bringing your full self to the work. And so I grew up in Maryland. And for those who are familiar with the DMV area, I grew up in Prince George's County. And I'm the youngest of 3 children, and I did very well in school academically. And this will sort of tie into the history. And I grew up in a predominantly white area of Southern Maryland. And I decided I wanted to go to a HBCU, which is a historically Black college or university outside of my home state for, the obvious reasons to get away from home and be independent. And so I applied to a few and I was accepted to Florida A&M. And after much prayer, I decided to attend FAMU. So my parents had always stressed the importance of education. While they had not graduated from college, they graduated from high school and went straight into the workforce. Absolutely, education was key. And so my dad originally joined the Air Force and then went into private industry. My mom graduated high school and ended up working with the federal government. And so what I learned, good, bad, or indifferent, from home, my church home, and certainly during my time at FAMU, is that as a woman and a woman of color, that I really had to be academically the whole package in excess of my peers who were not diverse. And the concept was you had to be better in order to be considered just on par or okay. And certainly, those are lessons that I have carried with me through today. And so I took that same approach when I decided to go to law school. I took the LSAT twice because the first time my score was very mediocre. So after I graduated from FAMU, I worked a while. I then took some time at night and I took a prep course for the LSAT. My score went up considerably. And as a result of that, I was able to go to the University of Miami School of Law on a full scholarship. But I think that whole process of getting there was really based on this: as a minority and as a woman, you have to sort of be excellent. And so that would really be my first piece of advice, that in an attempt to get in front of situations where gender and race may come into play, to be excellent at what you do to the best of your ability. I would like to think in a perfect world, that excellence that you bring to your work and to the projects about which you're passionate will make room for you. You can't deny excellence forever. So even if there is gender bias at play, I think, Sarah pointed this out, they trusted her. Her colleagues who were primarily men trusted her because of the excellence she brought to the work. And in terms of other advice, what I would add is, when you're looking at the situation, you're trying to figure out, is gender or race or a combination of both playing into the experience that I'm having? First of all, step back, check yourself. You need to be able to say, okay, am I also experiencing my own implicit or explicit biases in this situation? Or am I making assumptions, right, about the person with whom I'm working because of how I've been treated previously by others who may look like him or her? So that's first, check yourself. The next thing, consult with a trusted advisor or a friend. Run the scenarios by people that you value their opinion and they give good advice. And then thirdly, and importantly, pray about it. Because of my faith, I would suggest that. And still, that getting quiet, some people call it mindfulness, some people do meditation. People have different tools they use to quiet themselves and their minds to sort of get that wisdom that you need. And so once you run through your checkpoints, and those are the checkpoints I have certainly run through during my career, both at Greenberg and before, then sometimes you're going to be led to just make a full stop and do nothing. but sometimes there's something more that you want to do. So after you've kind of gone through those steps and you've looked at everything, the next thing I would say is know your worth, know your value, know what you're bringing to the table. And then be strategic. I mean, when you're facing those challenging situations, and what do I mean by that? Think about whether there are ways, strategic ways that you can work around that potential roadblock. You're really trying to stand up for yourself and move yourself towards success. And so you have to navigate those situations. You have to activate your coalitions, right? Hopefully you've been digging your well before you're thirsty. And that's a book by Harvey McKay, but maybe you've heard that phrase. And it really just means, have you been spending time developing relationships with people across your enterprise such that you can now call upon those relationships to help guide you and navigate a situation where you think race and gender are playing a part? And in other instances, and I think, Sarah pointed this out as well, you're in the meeting and you know that there are going to be some challenges just based on history, then there's always the meeting before the meeting. Maybe there's an opportunity to speak to your coworkers and say, you know what, these vendors tend to overlook me. I want to be sure that we're on the same page here. You also want to sort of check the temperature, be sure that the ideas and projects that you want to push forward, see if you can build a coalition before the meeting so that your idea gets pushed forward. And then most importantly, also stand up for yourself. I mean, I've not been in a situation where I've been harassed or had to make that kind of claim, but certainly if that's what you feel is required, you do that. You report through the proper channels. But sometimes if it's small microaggressions, little things that sort of hit you the wrong way, sometimes you have to say something with a respect and say, I don't think that's the right way to speak to me, or whatever that approach is, so that you can remain effective in your role. And then here's the other thing that I thought about in terms of tips and advice. Have you ever stepped back from the situation and when you got quiet and centered, you realize it's not even about me? Like, whatever this is I'm experiencing, this is their insecurities. This is their inability to work with me. I don't have any animosity. I'm bringing my full self to the work. I'm kind, I'm flexible, I'm collaborative. So sometimes realizing that it's not really you will help take the edge off of some of those situations and perhaps bring more empathy. People are dealing with a lot of different issues that they don't voice. And sometimes those things come across very aggressively towards us, but it's not about us. And then there are some people who are just not nice, right? And, so you have to sort of think about that and say, you know what? That person isn't nice to anybody. This may not really be about race or gender. This person is just not kind. And so you make those adjustments where you can. And then in terms of working with men as allies, before I get there, what I will say is everything that I have shared, those are things that I have had to do, and I'm sure will continue to have to do, as long as I'm in corporate America. But these are things that I have found have helped drive me to success, again, using my faith and the tips and the experiences of others and bringing them together for resolutions that work in my career. So working with men as allies, they are absolutely critical. And when I think back to just when I started law school, when I went to my first law firm, I joined Greenberg Traurig in 2002, so just over 18 years. And I came in as a third-year lawyer. So I've been in the practice about 21 years. But all throughout, from law school to my first job in the legal industry, coming into Greenberg, and even now, men have been very important. And this is the thing about full inclusion. In order to have a real conversation about full inclusion, we have to have men at the table. They are a part of the workforce, certainly. They're a part of the equation. And so it's not really a us versus them. It's bringing all of those different viewpoints to the table. And so I want to also say that what I have found in this work, particularly as a chief diversity officer, is that when you're faced with gender and bias, if you're doing trainings or you're educating your team informally on these issues, having conversations at the water cooler when we get back to a water cooler. There is a part of us that has to prepare ourselves to hear things that may not align with what we believe or what we feel is the best way forward. And in order to have conversations that hopefully will drive full inclusion in our different spaces, we have to sort of be willing to hear things that don't align with what we believe and not necessarily penalize the person who feels that way or who holds that opinion. And through that transparency, listening, even if we don't agree or respectfully disagreeing, I think will create better environments for all of us. And again, this is not in theory. This is certainly something that I, work through as well, even in my current position. So on being a minority woman shareholder, all the insights, and a chief diversity officer, all of the insights I've shared with you are wholly applicable. So with that, Sarah, I don't know if there are other questions you want to ask me, but all of this plays into everything that we do.
There were so many things that you said that really have struck me. Learning to quiet the mind, you have those moments where you're at the conference table or you're dealing with somebody, no matter what capacity, whether you're debating a problem and trying to come up with a solution, where there's lots of pressures to get a system back up, or really anything. Being able to take a step back and quiet yourself so that you don't react in the way that they're honestly expecting you to react. Mm-hmm. They're expecting you to react a certain way, which is then going to make them come back at you in a certain way, and how to break that cycle. And I think you said it beautifully of, just to take that step back, make sure that it's not you that's perceiving what they're saying as because the last two people did it doesn't necessarily mean this person is doing it. I'm a huge proponent of meditation myself. As you said, everyone's going to have, their method of how they do that. And if they don't, that is something that really that is a way to grow, to be able to look in and stop and pause, just that pause. I think the only way to change someone's perceptions of yourself is to really not be the stereotype, and not to react in the way that they are expecting you to. But then that brings up another question for me. Mm-hmm. And I would guess other people have thought that, other women have said the same thing, and there's in a moment. How can I think like a man? How can I behave like a man? How can I shut off, that side of me, without realizing that shutting off that portion of you that actually makes you a woman also removes a lot of your strengths and a lot of the amazing parts about us. So how do you channel it? How do you channel it so that I will be the first to admit, since math class in elementary school to today, I will get tears in my eyes if I get a certain amount of stress. Yes. I will cry, and it makes me so mad at myself. Yes. So that's one of the things where I've had to learn how do I check that. And I'm not sure if anyone else out there is dealing with that, but I mean, like I said, I can't stand the fact that I'm a crier, but
yes, but I'm a crier too. Yeah, I mean, so one of the biggest strengths I think we bring, and you said this, Sarah, is the emotional intelligence, right? And that EQ, I've read different articles, and some suggest that EQ, emotional intelligence, emotional quotient, is even more important than IQ, right? And, being able to read the room and sort of, feel the energy coming off different people, and being able to tap into that energy in a way that's productive is a huge asset for us. And so, I would, and because I'm a crier, I don't really have any sage advice, because if I get to a point where, something strikes me deeply, then the tear is going to come, right? And what, sometimes what I will do is just acknowledge it. What you said really resonated with me, or thank you for that transparency. That's really important. And so it just, I'm not crying necessarily because I'm angry. you know,
Right.
but I may
Right.
be, you know, emotional because something that someone has said has really touched me in an important way, and just validating that's my normal.
Right. Right.
So
It is really hard when you're dealing with people that you don't know. And like I said,
true.
I have gotten to a place with my coworkers, because I've worked with them, most of them, for decades now. That, you know, they know me, and if I have a moment, that, you know, they excuse me, and vice versa. But that doesn't always happen. You're not always, you know, you don't have that allowance when you're in the field, or you're at a
Right.
conference, or you're, you know, dealing with vendors. So, um, you know, looking into what works for you on
Right.
how, again, to quiet that. And again, not shutting yourself off. Like, I can't even tell you how many times I've said, I wish I thought like a man. I wish I could, you know, think
Yeah.
more like that. And it's just not going to happen. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
51 at this point, you know, there is no turning that off. And I don't want to, and no one else should
Right.
want to.
Right. Right.
There are a lot of questions coming in. I can't, Stephanie, like, as you said, I'm going to have trouble reading these and interacting. So if there's anything that you feel, you know, I'm trying to read some of them, but it's,
No
Yeah.
worries. Yeah, some of them are long, so I can just read off a couple. So some of them are comments. I can just read
Okay.
those. So Darshan says, agree, but it's reflection that I should have been quiet, not at required time. I'm not sure what that one. Okay. Awesome point to share. It's not about adopting the common male behaviors, but it's all about finding your own style. That was from Esther.
correct.
Wendy
And that's
has a,
tough. It takes
oh,
time.
sorry. Wendy has a question about, and she says, Namaste. How do you stay genuine in the corporate world when some of the decisions you make go against your own beliefs?
Ooh,
Wow. Well, that's really a tough one. And what I would say is, again, I'll go at it from or respond to it from my belief system, and then hopefully you might be able to take something away from that. My system is sort of based on love. I mean, I'm a practicing Christian, and so if from that viewpoint, if I approach things with how can I be of service, how can I bring my full self to the work and to show love and compassion and be responsible for how I show up in the world, and then share that love and be that light and that salt. And in that way, to the extent that maybe a decision is not necessarily something that I would support, I sort of allow that same free will that I enjoy to be, sort of equally enjoyed by everyone. And so that's kind of, where I take that discussion. And it's really not easy, but it is, from my vantage point, the reason why I think we're planted in certain places where you can share certain things, but you're coming from it from a perspective of how can I be, sort of a light and encouraging and salt, and allow people to see that, and then they have their own decisions to make, from that point forward. I hope that answers your question in some way.
I'm going to address what Tobias, Stephanie, I see. So Tobias, who is on here, I shared time with on the steering committee, and he was our vice president and then president, and now on to bigger and better things. He's asking, how do you give negative feedback? How do you receive negative feedback? It's one of those things, and it goes back to a little bit of what you're saying. How do you not, maybe react and take things personally, which I think women, we do. I don't want to say we're guilty of it. It is very frequent in our personalities. For me, I can say, in my world, that computer people tend to make decisions, whether it's a technical reason, a financial reason, or a client service reason. What, at some point, the technical reason is going to win. You know what, we need this amount of redundancy, we need this bigger data line, we need this more storage, and it all makes sense, right? There's times where It's a financial decision. You know what? We don't have the money for that, and we can't do that. It goes against what I want technically. Like, I'm not putting in the best system I can, but I know that this is all the funds that we have to do it with. Or why are we, Greenberg, Traurig, we really work hard, for our attorneys to make sure that they're very well taken care of, to the point where sometimes I think, can't they just do 2 clicks instead of 1? But no, they can't do 2 clicks instead of 1. We want to make it 1 click. And if that means a week of my time that seems silly, it doesn't matter, because it makes your life easier. So sometimes in the computer world, you have to step back, and it's not an emotional decision. It's not because that that's the best system, or that this is a waste of time in your world. You have to think about who you're servicing and who's it for and who's paying the bills. And a lot of times when you remove all of, your own personal stuff, someone's not telling you, okay, we're not doing this because you didn't have a good idea, or it's not a good idea. It's just not the idea that fits for our situation right now. And so sometimes I think taking all those factors into a whole and dealing with it, you can just take out the fact, well, I would have done it differently, but that's okay. And it takes a little bit of thick skin. We're all very proud of the systems that we put in, and we want to do the best one that we can, but sometimes it's just not what you want it to be, and that's okay.
Yeah. And I mean, receiving negative feedback, or hopefully constructive criticism, but either way, I think different sides of the same coin. I think you have to be willing to listen, take notes if you're in a situation where you can take notes, or take mental notes to the best of your ability. And then, you may not respond in the moment. And even if a response is requested, my recommendation has been to just say, a lot of information was shared. I need a little time to kind of go back and think through, any questions that I might have. And obviously you may have some things you want to ask right there and then, but particularly if you feel like the constructive criticism, it's been more on that end than the praise, then you may take that opportunity to say, you know what, let me just absorb what you've shared. You shared a lot of, information, and can we set a call in the next week or so, or can I follow up with you in the next couple of days? And then that's when you take those notes and you take that feedback back to your quiet place and sort of parse through it and figure out, again, maybe you will know who shared that particular feedback. Sometimes it might be just a global review, so you're not really sure where the information came from, although you may have, well, let me say this, you might be surprised as to where the information came from, even though you might think So that's a whole different, that's a whole different discussion. But just say, of what was shared with me, how much of it is true versus how much of it is perception or personality. And then the very difficult part of knowing yourself and knowing your value, and aligning that with the constructive criticism that you've received, and sort of figuring out what nuggets do you need to take out of that and carry forward and work on, versus what nuggets in that you're just going to say, you know what, I don't believe that piece is necessarily as accurate. I'm not going to necessarily focus on that. And then when you need to give constructive criticism and feedback, I always try to start with the positive, and then sort of say, an area of opportunity is whatever, you want to list out. And so it's not necessarily that you're sharing what I have a problem with is. And I have to be honest. So, I'm married. My husband, Andy, we have, 5 children that we've raised together. We've been married, been going on 18 years or so. And some of these skill sets are in the fighting fair, right? So it's funny how you can cross, pollinate skill sets, but it is that sort of recognizing what you're bringing to the table and saying it from a positive perspective rather than a negative perspective. So I hope that helps.
Well, and I think that goes back again, which may become the running theme here, is quiet your mind and make sure, that you're responding as you would want to, because we all, respond too quickly too often. And a very a close person in my life has always kind of said, you know, usually your first perceptions of those things, you know, while we are kind of told to trust your gut, you know, your first perception of what people are saying to you a lot of times aren't correct. And like you said, it's your own biases that you're putting in. It's the person, the situation that you dealt with before, that sort of thing. So that whole check yourself, I think, is great. So another question I think is fantastic is from Rhiannon, and this really applies to Greenberg Traurig. With an office, we have 41 offices in 11 different countries. She's asking, when you're dealing with people of other cultures, you know, a lot of cultures, the men and the women are not aligned as they are. You know, we struggle with our own in the US, but you step outside and a lot of those dynamics are a lot different. And how can you, and I know that Stephanie actually has dealt with this a lot in her university, that how do you deal with other cultures where, you know, there is that stereotype that, you know, that traditionally they're not looking at you the same. And how can you both navigate that and possibly even change that? Or can you change that?
Well, I think first and foremost, I think we have to respect the cultures in which we're doing business. And what does that mean? That means obviously when we travel, you know, you sort of show up to those enterprises or those offices in a way that is respectful to the culture. You know, whether it's a head covering in a certain culture, or maybe you're wearing, you know, a dress versus, I mean, because you want people to be able to hear the message and not be stuck on the messenger. And so taking your cues and getting guidance from your local leaders as to how people receive information and how things are done is invaluable. It's really important, because if we're talking about it from a workplace standpoint, the goal is to get the project accomplished, to get the case done, to get the deal closed. And so if that's our priority, then the way we show up should be supportive of that priority. And so in that situation, while we're still individuals and we try to be, you know, bring our full selves to the work, I think in doing that, in those instances, we take our cues locally. And I think that's the way to be respectful so that the work that we need to accomplish gets done. And then I think in terms of the progress, you take that progress very, you know, sort of slowly, and as it comes, I think that it's wise to understand that it's all a journey. I mean, the way women may be perceived in one nation is very different from the way women may be perceived in others. And so I think we have to take people and the situations as we find them.
Awesome. I fully agree. And I've dealt with it in our firm, where you just, even your word choice when you're sending emails and that sort of thing, you know, you have to consider that this person, you know, isn't necessarily trying to be difficult. This was how they were raised, and the lingo that you use, or you know, and so a lot of times I try and remove slang from my emails when I'm dealing with our European offices, because I know it's going to get lost and then it's going to create more confusion. So another question, and I'm not trying to skip any, from Andrew: what can you tell a man to try and do to make sure they aren't inadvertently being a typical male? Is there advice for someone so that they don't just get that perception or stamp? Can you go the extra mile? Is there something that they can say that, you know, would sort of let a woman know that they're an ally without just saying, look, I'm an ally, which may or may not.
Yeah,
Sure,
I mean, what can men do? So one, to the extent you're in a position, and probably everyone on this webinar is probably in a position to be a mentor or to be a sponsor of a woman. And so what do I mean? I mean, mentorship is pretty common. It's really giving advice, being a sounding board, very important, particularly, you know, when colleagues are young in their careers, but certainly as you grow in your careers and you get to higher heights, men can certainly continue to mentor women. The other thing that men can certainly do is to be a sponsor. And a sponsor is someone who uses his or her political capital to advance the career of someone else. And so to the extent you come across opportunities that you normally would say, oh, let me give it to, you know, my guy friend that I go to coffee with every day at 3, maybe you step back and say, you know what, there may be other people on my team or in the office that I think would be really great for this opportunity. Let me, let me avail this opportunity to this young woman. So men can certainly do that. I think also practicing empathy. And so just understanding, maybe you look at situations, if you're a dad of daughters, or if you're a brother of sisters, or, however you want to sort of reconfigure your thinking to say, if my sister was in this situation and she was the one needing this advice or trying to navigate this situation, what would I tell her? Or how would I want the leaders in her division to treat her? And then practice that. So putting ourselves in the shoes of someone else, or taking it from a perspective of, how would I feel if this was my daughter? Would I say it if this was my niece? And so just putting that hat on and sort of changing your perspective, I think, would add a lot of clarity to how you're approaching some situations.
And I don't know if Stephanie, if Neil Spellings is on, and if he is, I'd love him to maybe chime in. But if not, I'm going to speak for him based on his past
Yeah, I don't see
interactions.
him. I
Okay,
see
so
Mike Nelson, but I don't see Neil.
he's one of our male mentors, and one of the things that they have spoken about is sometimes when a man, and I think my point in this, I'm going to lead with, is sometimes we don't appreciate that those men are up against challenges themselves, that if they speak up for you, if they call out that sort of crass coworker who makes an off-color joke that's inappropriate, and if they do that, a lot of times they get accosted, they get shamed, they have to put up with, oh well, don't, shh, here comes Neil, we can't talk like that. And so know that there are men out there too that are lobbying for you slowly. They're not necessarily, carrying a sign, but they will stand up for you. I mean, it's frustrating from our point of view to think, okay, why do you have to do that anyway? Like, we would be lovely to get to a place where that doesn't have to ever happen anyway, but we're not there. So always, I think, to seek out and try and recognize those men. And I think you can pick up on the cues of someone who is trying to help, that you're not worried that if you're interacting with them that they think you're hitting on them, or or they think they have a chance, something like that. That it's just a true professional relationship, and to take that a step further when you have those opportunities, and realize though that they are up against stuff too, dealing with the same sort of crass gentlemen that we all are. And I'm very grateful for those, and I know there's a lot of them in our organization, meaning the good side, that I have grown to trust, and they trust me, as I said. And so learning to recognize that. I mean, I'm not sure if there's any, what's a tip for maybe learning to recognize those men? And that goes back to a little bit of Andrew saying, how do you not come across as the typical male? Short of maybe just everyone being a little more open and trusting. And it's not always going to work out well, but I'm not sure if that's a good piece of advice or not.
Yeah, and I don't know what it means, typical male. I mean, so I push back on that a little bit, but
Okay.
I think that you certainly, you have your sense of humor and jokes, and just to be more sensitive, about how you're showing up. So to the extent that you think maybe, the dialogue is a little raunchy, maybe not appropriate for the water cooler, then just be aware of that and try to be more sensitive to that. But I think the mentorship and the sponsorship are really important. And to your point, Sarah, also, being willing to be that voice in the room when the women aren't in the room, to potentially say, yeah, my niece faced that situation and I really hated that for her, or whatever, to just try to bring the dialogue back to where you want it to be, which is inclusive.
Right. All right. So another one, I try from Danielle. Can you provide some advice on dealing with when you think might be racist towards colored professional women? It's there, but they're not saying it, of course. I think maybe just recognizing, I'm not sure I'm reading that right. Stephanie,
Can you repeat it?
It says, can you provide some advice on dealing with some you think might be racist towards colored professional women? It is there, but they are not saying it, of course. I mean, I suppose it's one of those, you know, what's happening. How do you deal with it? How do you?
Right. So it depends. If you feel like it's, interfering with your ability to do your job, then I think you have to sort of follow your HR, chain of reporting and take that sort of that route. If you feel like it's more relational, or you need to be able to get answers from this person, or get projects approved by this person, and things are not going smoothly, then you start to get into your strategy. Let me check myself, let me figure out, am I bringing my biases to it? Am I really looking at this the right way? Okay, next thing, let me consult with my personal board of directors, sort of figure out, run the scenarios by them, figure out if I'm seeing something or missing something, activate your faith, figure out, get quiet about it, figure out what am I bringing to the table that may be potentially impacting this. And again, not to say you still don't stand up for yourself, but just recognizing what you're also bringing to the table potentially that might be impacting the situation. And then figuring out, can I strategize around this person to get to my
Right.
success?
Right.
And if I can't strategize around this person to get to my success, and I feel like this is approached, an area where sort of it's a legal concern, then you follow those chains of command. And if not, then you may have to sort of figure out, how do I navigate myself out of this department, out of this direct report, to a better space if you want to stay within that company. I mean,
Right.
and
And I
again,
think that
these are really tough decisions.
they are, and that's one of the things that you and Stephanie and I have discussed on our call, and then also I have dealt with in other areas. And I think sometimes you absolutely know what's happening. You
Mhm.
know what's happening. You know what it is. It has everything, but a sign on top of it. And the only way to potential, as you said, if it's not an HR reportable level, the only way to change it, I think, sometimes is, as you said, find your way around it. I don't want to say you have to like do everything and cater to that person to get them to change their mind, because that might never happen. But is there a way? Try and step back and look at the situation and say, is there some way I can react, present myself to try and alter this person's, perception or even reality? Because again, that's probably how they were raised. So now you're chipping away maybe at 40 years of or 50 or 60, of thought process. So it is a huge challenge, but that doesn't necessarily mean it is always impossible. And that's easy for me to say, like, and I fully understand that. And like I said, and even in my personal life, I've dealt with some of this, but I've also watched people change other people's perceptions of them just by really being very genuine and very who they are, and finding, as you said, alternative sort of routes, as opposed to getting angry and reacting.
Right. I mean, I think that's really the tough thing. I mean, and hopefully that is helpful to, the colleague who raised that question. And I would just encourage, him or her to really just step back and apply some of those steps, or reapply them to the extent, they've already tried it once.
Yeah. Okay, next question is from Monica. And I understand this one wholeheartedly. And you've said it too. Women, a lot of times we have to work harder. We have to work harder. We have to come more to the table with more information. We have to have the problem solved. We have to be excellent, as you said, but we're also tending to the kids and you know, the daycare and all the things, and the cooking and a lot of things. And then, well, look, and men, in my household, the men cook, and I'm grateful for that. But not everyone has that. Some people do have like that household that is sort of, the woman is doing it all. Too many people have that, I would probably say. So she's asking, how do you prioritize things? What are some of the things you do to make your
Ooh,
self-care a priority?
boy, oh
With
boy.
5 kids and a husband and the job you
Yeah.
hold, I know you're
Let me
doing
tell you
this.
something. Let me tell you something. So it is a journey. So I want to start by saying that, and it ebbs and flows. I do, first of all, I get up a little early. And everything I'm going to say is really me, and then you will figure out what works for you. But I am much more of a morning person. And I've always been that way. My parents are that way. My grandparents were that way. And so I am more prone to be up at 4 a.m. and then to try to, meditate, read my word, go work out, come back. And so by the time I come back, and, I was going to the gym, but now I'm not going to the gym, but that's, I'm walking in the neighborhood. And then when I come back is about the time that, the kids are getting up and getting ready to go to school. And so you have that piece. I also, a while ago, stopped ascribing to the work-life balance, okay? It, in my opinion, does not exist. And so rather than, because when we say work-life balance, it presupposes that things are 50-50, that things are even across the board. That's what balance means. But more what I subscribe to now is really a work-life flow. And that means that things kind of, no
More
day
forgiving.
is like any, right. No day is like any other day. And so while you have a schedule, you sort of have a routine, when you're in that space, you allow yourself more, to Sarah's point, you're more forgiving when it's just not going to be perfect. And so you had planned to get to the office early, work on the project that was due on Thursday, have the 4 conference calls and 2 meetings, and then leave the office at 6 and get home and do X, Y, or Z. By the time you get to the office, there's someone that you need to talk to, something has happened, you're not able to do it, then you get a call from the school or the nursing home and you need to, so you just sort of figure that out. But all in all, finding that time, whether it's 4 a.m., if it's during your noon lunch break, if it's before you hit the front door after your commute home, or, before you pick up the kids, like that, 30 minutes before you have to get to the car line, to get them for the orthodontist, to get to the pediatrician, figuring that out. It's been my experience that when I figured that out, and I sometimes have to refigure it out, I am much less angry. I am much less resentful of all the blessings that I have, because I have taken that time for me. And so that's, I think, and I hope that answered the question, just finding some kind of time. And it's going to feel very sacrificial at first. Can I really afford to do that? I really do want to sleep longer, or I really do want to do this or that. So it's all about choices, and that's the work-life flow.
And I think, to the point where, Monica is saying she feels like she has to come to the table with more research than maybe some of her male counterparts.
Yeah.
I unfortunately, I think that might just be a given.
I mean,
I do think when you work with a group long enough, you do develop that trust that eventually that could dissipate, and I think I'm a testament to that, you don't, it's not, my day isn't a constant, proving myself anymore. And it's very situational, usually with outside people, but it's a process. And unfortunately, it's what we have to do. And which isn't to say, and again, I don't want to just act like men are coasting through here. I mean, I have watched a lot of different men from different cultures and, and different ages work very, very hard. And I think it's okay to say you don't know the answer. In our world, where we're expected to come up with that checkbox or that string or that registry setting that fixes everything, you know what? Sometimes it's, I haven't gotten it yet. I haven't found it yet. And again, to even how I opened, know who to ask. Surround yourself with people that you can go to and ask for help. I think there has to be absolutely no shame in that. And I've become a huge proponent that I'll wave a flag. I don't know the answer, so I'm going to go over here and try and find it. And that's okay.
Right. And that's a journey. I mean, that's a journey, I think, to get to that point, to where you're comfortable being able to do that. And I'm not sure, but you do, my entire
Unfortunate moment.
academic life. Yeah. And even being better prepared with more research, you know, having sort of all the different T's, you know, crossed and I's dotted, it's, you know, really part and parcel until you get to that point.
A couple of the other questions, you know, how do we bridge the gap and get more women in technology? Well, we keep holding things like this and encouraging our young people. I think there is no, you know, women are not necessarily gravitate towards some of these sciences. And then also when you feel like it's already a bunch of men, but we're finding our way in there. So I'm hopeful. Mike Nelson says, since he became a male women in tech mentor, he receives more curious looks and comments by females than males. Interesting. Which, you know what, doesn't surprise me. Sometimes we are not kind to each other. And it goes across the board, whether it's your neighborhood or other things. And I think being the example, this is would be my thing, is being the person that you want to be. Also, you know, I won't say anything that I wouldn't hand over my, you know, I would have to say it in front of a man versus a woman versus my child, that kind of thing. You know, be the person you want to be. But that is interesting that the women, so let me read it a little bit further. Made comments about me being in a women's club. I have experienced more females either being very inquisitive as to why I volunteered. We are a bit leery because we unfortunately, a lot of us have been in situations where we think, you know, we're questioning your motives, which again, it's just a given, unfortunately. And saying why they don't know many women that would want male mentors over females. So I will say, when we started talking about having men in women in tech, I actually was a proponent of it. And my brother, who is a technical person living on the West Coast, he actually was part of a women's group and would go in there and do exactly kind of what we're doing now and offer that male perspective. So I thought it was invaluable, especially when you got, you know, really great advice. To listen to other women maybe not be accepting of it. One, for me, I think you're going to have to understand that we do get hit on and it's unpleasant. And so a lot of us might be uncomfortable in those situations. And honestly, if you tell me you're not hitting on me, then and you're thinking that's, you know, lending credibility, I'm just doubting you more. So do you have any advice of what you could tell men to say, how do you present yourself that we know there's not an ulterior motive?
I mean, you know, that's the checking our own biases. I mean, we all have them. And so applying, just because we were hit on 9 other times doesn't mean this person who is here today as a part of this opportunity is going to hit on me. And so that's, I mean, the fact that we all have these implicit or explicit biases, those are things that, again, just like a man is entitled to be supportive of women and we say we need them at the table, then we have to allow them at the table and not necessarily say you have to prove it to me first. I mean, that's agree. Just, yeah, it's a two-edged sword and it's a double standard.
I think just being mindful that both sides might feel that, you know, and unfortunately, you know, and in this day and age with the pandemic, we're going to have less of it. But I would say, you know, generally don't touch a woman on the shoulder. Don't be overly physical. There's little things that I think you can remove from the table that'll just make everybody more comfortable. Honestly, don't compliment or dress. Just keep it business. Be friendly, but don't necessarily, you know, it's a tough one. It's a tough one and it's a process and each person is going to manage it differently. I'm sad to hear that women are the ones that are questioning it. And so I will be, you know, I will keep an ear out for when I am in these groups to try and foster, you know, one by one, a different idea about that. Stephanie,
so Stephanie, we see you.
Hi.
Go away.
Yeah, so we're at the hour, but I think that we've covered most of everyone's questions, and some of them have been, I mean, they've all been really great. I know there was one about personal branding we didn't get to, but I think we can take a lot. Yeah.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will be
mean,
honest, I skipped that one because I felt like that was more industry. I wasn't even sure. So, but
well,
we
I
can
thought
submit
maybe it
that,
was,
right?
yeah, like maybe in the context of this, like how would you brand yourself? But I don't know if you have like any quick thoughts on it. That might be too much.
I mean, I just think personal branding is very important. You have to be intentional about it. Figure out what you want people to say about you when you're not in the room, and then strategize to get to that. I want them to know that I'm prepared, sharp, collaborative. And so you work on those skills so that those are part of your personal brand. So what do you want people to think about you when you're not in the room?
I think that's great. That's a great way to think about it. I like that. And then
Um,
just I see lots of great comments, just like, you know, wonderful, wonderful, happy people happy that we did this webinar. So that makes me happy.
Good, good.
yeah,
Um,
well, I knew every time I leave the phone with Nikki, I feel like I can change the world.
Let me tell you something. This has been great. This has been great. And I don't know whether, if there are any questions I can answer, Stephanie and Sarah, maybe give you some of those answers in writing, after, if there's anything that's really something we really, want to touch on to
This, yeah.
encourage, yeah, our colleagues for sure. Happy to do that.
Okay,
So,
yeah, I can
yep.
send those to you. I did put in the chat some links
Uh-huh.
to Greenberg's initiatives on Twitter, the two Twitter channels for
Yes.
GT
Yes.
Law Women and GT Drive. So if you're just interested, even if you're not in the legal world, maybe just to see what some of these things look like, and maybe something that you could, I don't know, think about doing on your own company, or I don't know. I just think that it's fun to draw inspiration from outside of your own little box sometimes. So,
Absolutely.
so I put those in the chat. I put the survey link in the chat. And again, if anyone has any interest or wants to know more about CUGC's Women in Tech program, my email address is in the chat, and you'll also see it in your GoToWebinar email tomorrow. It's everywhere. Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Nikki, and thank you, Sarah. I really appreciate you guys taking time today and doing this webinar. I think it was just a really important conversation. Even if we're working from home, all of
Yes,
these things are still important. I think
that's
it's great
correct.
to talk about. So really
Awesome.
appreciate
Thank
your
you
time.
all.
All
Thank
right,
you.
everyone, have
Be
a
safe,
great day.
everybody.
All right,
Bye.
bye.
Are we, I guess, are we still here? I'm still here.